Her friends are starting to worry. She's not sleeping, she's missing her classes, and it really seems like she barely knows where she is half the time. And it's not just her friends who are starting to notice, because Mount Union College isn't really a big school. According to a 2020 survey by the US News and World Report, the average student body size in the US is 6,350 students. And as of 2023, Mount Union has approximately 2,100 students. So it's just small enough that if you're really doing badly, people will start talking. And some of the faculty members are asking her by her name. Why isn't she coming to office hours? Why didn't she hand in her last assignment? College is stressful for pretty much everyone. It's normal to struggle, of course. We've all been there at some point. But with her, it's next level. And they're all wondering, how did this happen? Because the kids she went to high school with knew her as a high achiever. She was one of those students who did everything right. Good at sports, really good grades, top of her class. You know the kind of girl I'm talking about. Maybe she was too burnt out from high school that she just needed a break. That's normal at college too. Your parents aren't really around, you finally have some freedom, so maybe you go a little bit crazy with it. But something about this just felt really different. And where are her parents anyways? The house is only a 40-minute drive away from her university. Do they realize what's going on? Do they even care? Or is she just doing a really good job at hiding it? So before we begin, please note that this video does discuss sensitive topics, including violence, mental health issues, and loss of life, so viewer discretion is advised. As always, I really encourage you guys to take the time to understand this case and form your own opinions. Brenda Powell, she's one of those women who are just known to be this super warm and kind-hearted person. Like, you really think to yourself, like, there is not a better person than this. She works at Akron's Children's Hospital, and she takes care of kids of all ages, especially those who are suffering with cancer and other blood disorders. She loves to work with children, and she gets along with everyone really well. And all of her coworkers really respect her. She's overall just a really kind-hearted, good person. Now, Brenda is happily married to Stephen Powell, and he's a steel worker. They met back in 1995, and then a year later, they tied the knot. So they had a really good and loving relationship. Soon after that, they ended up having 2 kids. They're known as Sydney Powell and her brother, Andrew. Now, Brenda and Stephen had a really good marriage. From the moment they met till the rest of the time that they were together, they were known to be a really loving couple, and that was reflected in their family life. Sydney and her brother Andrew had a really good and stable upbringing. Really nice home, good school, like everything about their family was almost picture perfect, you know? Sydney Powell was born and raised in Akron, Ohio, and she also has a really great relationship with her mom. She goes to her for advice whenever she needs help with anything, and the two of them are very, very close. Sydney is also known to be an incredibly high achieving student in high school. She was very successful academically, and she had a 3.8 GPA. Not only was she good at studies, but she was also really athletic. She played lacrosse, she played football, and in her final year of high school, she was even captain of the football team. Sydney was known to be very nice and a little bit quiet, but overall a really kind student who got along with everyone. Even teachers were quite fond of her. Friends would say that Sydney was a little bit shy at first, but eventually she would warm up to you and her personality would open up. And because Sydney did so well in high school, she was able to earn a full scholarship ride to University of Mount Union. So Sydney is a really high achieving, successful student in high school, and the next chapter of her life in university is probably going to be really exciting too, right? I mean, her parents have nothing to worry about. Sydney is going to do amazing, or so they thought. In Sydney's first year of university, everything goes pretty smoothly and she's adjusting well. Now, by the time it's her second semester of her second year, her parents are starting to suspect that something is going on. There's something that's just a little bit off with Sydney. In January, Stephen, her dad, noticed that he couldn't access the parental financial portal. You know, when you go to school, I think in university and maybe even in high school, your parents have access to a student portal where they can probably pay for your school fees, maybe access certain information about you as a student, and he couldn't access this. So he thought, oh, that is a little bit strange. I wonder why that is. And when he asked Sydney about it, she was just a little bit dismissive, kind of like, yeah, don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. And even though that was a little bit concerning to Stephen, he didn't think too much of it because, yeah, it probably was just a technical problem. Now, in February, just a month after that, Brenda also started getting a little bit concerned. She started realizing that there was some inconsistencies in Sydney's stories when Brenda would ask her about her life on campus. When she asked her questions, Sydney would just be kind of avoidant and dismissive, wouldn't really open up about her friends, her grades, her classes. And when Brenda was like, "Oh, let me come visit you and see how it's going," Sydney just said no. Sorry, but please don't visit me. Now, it seems like at this point, both of her parents are kind of suspicious that something is going on. But at the same time, is it really that abnormal? I mean, you're a student in your first or second year, you're relatively new. And kids that age, I mean, she was probably 18, 19, so she's not exactly a kid, but that's still a pretty young age where you're just trying to explore your freedom, you're away from home for the first time. So even though things weren't making sense, there were probably ways to explain Sydney's behavior. In the early morning of March 3rd, 2020, the Mount Union Registrar's office contacts Sydney's home, and their call went straight to voicemail because no one was home at the time. But that's a little weird, right? Why is a university trying to contact Sydney's parents? Well, because no one was there to answer the phone at home, they decided to call Stephen. Now, during this time, he was at work, he was having a relatively normal day, like any other, wasn't thinking about much, just trying to focus on the task at hand, when suddenly his phone starts ringing, and he checks it. Oh, it's coming from the Mount Union Registrar's office. That's weird. They've literally never called me before. This is coming really out of nowhere. I wonder what's going on. Is Sydney okay? Why are they calling me? Did something bad happen? What's going on? So he picks up, and the university tells him, unfortunately, Sydney is no longer a student at Mount Union. She's actually also been kicked out of her hall of residence. Wait, kicked out? Not staying at her hall of residence. She's not even enrolled in the university. What are you talking about? Just a couple of weeks ago, she told me that everything was fine. So what's going on? Because she's been lying to us for months. So it seems that all the suspicions that Stephen and Brenda had were right. They should have followed their intuition. Stephen and Brenda thought, yeah, something weird is going on, but maybe it's not that abnormal for kids their age. But now they realize, yeah, our suspicions were correct. Sydney, who was once a star student in high school, she was a high achiever, captain of her football team, has now been kicked out of university and actively lying about it to her parents for months. Stephen is sitting in his office and he's just feeling kind of shocked. Their daughter, who was an incredibly high achiever in high school, they knew who she was and what she was like. She was kind, she was good at heart, she never lied to her parents. So what is going on? Why was she intentionally deceiving and misleading them for months? Why hadn't she said anything? Stephen's just kind of sitting there with all of these mixed feelings. His mind is racing. Then suddenly he gets this alert on his phone. Oh, it's from this Life 360 app. It just says that Sydney just arrived home. But wait, that's also really weird because she's not supposed to be home for another 10 days. Now, if you're not sure what the Life 360 app is, it's an app where you can essentially track other people. Of course, you need to give them permission and you can kind of see where they're going, when they're going to be home, when they leave their home. And I only know about this app because my friends and I used to use it in high school to kind of see, oh, my friend is home. Oh, I know where she is. But I think to use it with your family, I don't know, that feels very personal. And I'm not judging whatsoever. I just can't relate because my family has never used a tracking app, but I can understand that some family members probably use it to make sure that everyone is safe, especially if you have kids and they're starting to go out. You know, maybe they're like 18 and they're just starting to hang out with friends and you're a little bit concerned. I totally understand that. But Sydney was in university. So why were they still keeping track of her? Like, this is a little bit odd in my opinion, but I'm really curious to know what you guys think. So let me know in the comment section down below. So Sydney wasn't supposed to be home for 10 days. So Stephen obviously is like, okay, I need to go to the house and ask her what is going on. And I need to figure out an explanation here because none of this is making sense. So he decides to leave the office and go home. But he leaves his phone in the office, and this is intentional because he didn't want Sydney to know that he was coming over. Now, it does kind of seem like he wanted to ambush her in a way, but this was done with reason. He was afraid that maybe Sydney would recognize that her dad is coming and just run away and try to prepare maybe another lie. So it makes sense that Stephen didn't want her to know that he was coming. Now, when Stephen arrives home, he confronts Sydney, and he's not mad at her or aggressive about anything. Not at all. He's just a concerned parent parent who wants to know what's going on with their daughter. So he asks her, what's going on with you getting kicked out of your whole of residence? Like, where have you been staying this whole time? Sydney's just dismissive, like, oh, it's fine, like, don't worry about it. But he's just trying to find out what's going on. So he pushes and he pushes a little bit, but she says, oh, I'm still making classes. Don't worry about me. She's making a lot of excuses. And her dad is trying really hard to be supportive until Sydney eventually breaks down. And she tells her dad, I just feel like all of my friends have their life together and I don't. I'm just really struggling. And her dad is trying to reassure her, like, Sydney, it's going to be okay. We're going to sort it out. Now at this time, Stephen is kind of recognizing, okay, moms know best. It's time to call Brenda. So he calls up Brenda, who was working at the Akron's Children's Hospital at that time. Now, Brenda works with children who have certain physical disorders or children who have troubling behavior. So it's a nice thing that she has experience in this area and could probably use that background to aid her in the situation with Sydney. Not to mention, her and Sydney have a really good relationship with one another. So it makes sense that Brenda is called over so she can help sort out the situation. So as Brenda is coming over, Stephen decides that he's going to go back to work and let Brenda sort this out. And I'm not trying to blame Stephen whatsoever. Maybe he really has to go back to work and he has no choice, but I'm also thinking, why doesn't he stay? He's clearly a concerned parent and he loves Sydney. Wouldn't you want to sort these issues out as a family? Wouldn't you want to know what's fully going on? I mean, you were just at work and then suddenly your daughter is home 10 days early and you just found out that she got kicked out of school. But I can also understand that maybe he thought Sydney and Brenda would be able to have a more meaningful and open conversation without Stephen there. They are pretty close with one another, and perhaps Sydney wouldn't feel comfortable opening up if everyone was there. Stephen leaves, and Brenda is home with Sydney at this point. And now Brenda's like, I'm going to call the school. We need to figure out what's going on because you're clearly not telling us the full story. Why can't we access the student portal? Why have you been kicked out of your whole of residence? Why are you not enrolled anymore? Like, we thought everything was going well. So what kind of trouble is she really in? So her parents thought that everything was going well in the first year of university. But in Sydney's first year, second semester, this is when things started going downhill a little bit. This is when Sydney really began experiencing academic difficulties. She stopped attending classes, she fell behind on coursework, and she didn't tell her parents about any of it. She really tried to keep painting herself as a successful student, and this is somewhat understandable. She probably felt a lot of shame and guilt during this time and just felt like she couldn't open up to anyone about all of her struggles. As the semester progressed, she began withdrawing socially now. She was spending more time alone, she was sleeping excessively, and when I say excessively, I mean up to 16 hours. Now, this is signs of depression. So it really seems like at this point, Sydney is now really struggling. She's isolating herself. All of her friends are asking her to hang out, and Sydney would just say, no, just spending time alone in her room. And I understand university can be a really hard time. It's your first time away from family. There's a lot of adjustments to be made, and I think it isn't that uncommon for some people to feel quite depressive in their first year of university. Unfortunately, while Sydney was struggling with mental health issues, she did not seek out any support from her university. And there are support systems in place, but I can understand as well that sometimes asking for help is also really difficult. By the end of her fall semester, she unfortunately didn't get any passing grades, so she was actually put on academic probation. What this means was she was no longer a student anymore. It was like a suspension, but she was able to re-enroll the next semester. So now in the first semester of her second year, she re-enrolls into Mount Union. And again, she's telling her parents, everything is fine. I'm planning to improve academically. You guys don't have anything to worry about. But she unfortunately wasn't able to actually re-enroll. So she wasn't even a student anymore at this point. And she didn't tell anybody. Like, her family didn't know, her friends didn't know, her teachers obviously knew she wasn't a student anymore, but she was still going to classes and participating in class like nothing happened. And you might be thinking, how did no teacher know? But at the same time, university lectures can have a lot of students. So most of the times, in my experience as well, the lecturer is not going to be like, oh, I know you're supposed to be here, you're not supposed to be here. So it's probably quite easy for her to get away with attending class. I mean, most of the time students try to skip class, not try to sneak into class. Anyways, in January of 2020, this is also when she returned to her whole of residence. And again, she wasn't a registered student. So she was staying at her hall of residence without anyone knowing, and technically she was not allowed to. This was up until the sorority president, or however you like to call it, depending on where you're from, the owner of the hall of residence, not the owner, but other students can also kind of run the floor that you're staying at. You kind of look to them as an advisor, a hall advisor. Anyways, they had found out that Sydney was staying in the hall of residence when she wasn't supposed to. So obviously they asked her to leave, and Sydney was like, yeah, I'll leave. Don't worry about it. But she stayed. She didn't leave. They ask her again, same thing. Yeah, I'll leave. And she does it. Only until staff gets involved and tell her, hey, if you don't get out of here, we're going to contact your parents and let them know what you've been doing. And only up until that point, then Sydney was like, okay, wait, don't tell my parents, I'll just leave. Now, Sydney leaves and she has nowhere to stay. So she's kind of couch surfing. She's sleeping in her car. She's staying in hotels, staying with different friends at the time. And her friends must have noticed that obviously something is really going on. She's been withdrawing socially for months. She's been sleeping a lot. Now she's asking us to stay at our house and she's hopping between friends. But even then, Sydney just didn't open up to anyone. So it makes me wonder, her parents have this tracking app, Life 360. Did they not see where Sydney was? Were they not able to see that she was no longer staying in her hall of residency? She was sleeping in her car, moving between friends' houses. And it seems like that a lot of people in Sydney's life at this point saw the signs. She needed help, but no one helped her. I'm going to assume that people did try to help, because when friends notice, of course, they're going to ask, are you okay? Do you need something? But sometimes you can't help someone who doesn't want to help themselves. Now we're back at home with Brenda and Sydney, and Brenda is a little bit upset. She wants to get to the bottom of what's going on and figure out, why has Sydney been lying to us for months? So she decides to call the registrar's office, and the call goes to voicemail. Now at this time, the associate dean and the dean of student affairs were actually in between meetings when suddenly they were informed that Brenda, Sydney Powell's mom, was trying to get a hold of them. And they instantly recognize who Brenda is. Sydney has been a problem student for them. And even though this university is only around 2,000 students, it's still small enough where they're able to know exactly who the parent was. So it really goes to show how much trouble Sydney was actually causing for the school. Like if my parent called my university, they probably would have had no idea who I was. So the associate dean and the dean of student affairs decide, okay, let's go to an office to brace ourselves for this difficult conversation. Like this is not going to be easy. We're going to need a private room for this. So they go back to the office and they call Brenda back, and Brenda picks up. Now they're on the phone for a little bit and the dean is introducing himself when suddenly they hear a loud thud from the other side of the phone. And there's around 15 seconds of a lot of noises, a lot of commotion. They don't really know what's going on. Hello, Brenda, are you okay? Are you there? Is everything all right? And then they hear screaming from the other end all of a sudden, and then the call just drops. So they're like, oh, what was that? We need to call them back. Call back once, no answer. Call back a second time, no answer. The third time the phone rings, someone picks up and they go, yes, it's Brenda, but they recognize that voice. That wasn't Brenda. That was Sydney's voice. Sydney? Is that you? And then the call just ends. So obviously this is really concerning, so the university calls the police for a wellness check at the Powell home. And at the same time, Brenda's work supervisor was calling Brenda because she failed to report for a scheduled shift. Now, when that didn't work, she contacted a family friend who was also trying to contact Brenda, and obviously no one can get through at this time. There was also another person, Detective Kenneth Dyes of the Akron Police Department, and he sees the dispatch that is being sent to Powell's home, and he is actually very good friends with Steven, so he rings him up just to let him know, hey, I don't know exactly what's going on, but there is police going over to your house right now. I thought I would just let you know. So the police arrive for what is supposed to be a wellness check, and as they enter the Powell residence, Sydney meets them at the door, screaming bloody murder. Someone broke in the back window, like she's just on the ground, like I don't know what to do. Who's on the ground? My mom is on the ground. No, there's so much blood, like don't go in there. She's not wanting the police to go in. She's screaming, she's hysterical. Like something really bad has just happened and she does not want the police to see it. As the police enter the home, they see broken glass everywhere. Things have been shifted around. It really does look like someone maybe broke into the house. They head over to the bedroom and they find Brenda's body on the floor. She's not breathing and she's covered in a pool of her blood. And near her body is a frying pan and a steak knife. Now, during this time, they decide to bring Sydney outside of the home to try to calm her down because this is now a crime scene. There is a dead body here. Sydney sits down on the curb and she's just being questioned by the police, but she's ignoring everything that they're saying. Is your name Sydney Powell? What are you doing home? Regular standard questions, you know, and the whole time she's just dissociating, not giving them any attention whatsoever, not even answering her name. And it really looks like she's dissociating. She eventually lies into a fetal position on the side of the road. And this whole time she's just whispering, like, get out, get out, get out, over and over again. While Sydney is sitting on the side of the road, her dad now arrives on scene and he goes over to Sydney and she's surrounded by police officers. One officer asks him, "Are you her dad?" Yes, I'm the dad. Does she have any history of mental health issues? No, I mean, she was just having a little bit of trouble at school and she just came home to work things out. So, Stephen, I can't imagine what he must have been feeling in that moment. To come home to your wife being murdered. We don't know by who yet at this point or what had happened. Your daughter's sitting on the side of the road dissociating. What is going on? The last time he saw them, they were about to work things out and talk to each other and figure out what was going on. And then he just returns from work to this situation. I can't imagine that. Brenda was immediately brought to the hospital, but she unfortunately succumbed to her injuries and was pronounced dead soon after. Sydney was also sent to the hospital for minor injuries because she had cuts all over her arms. Now, everyone is wondering, what is going on? If this was truly a break-in, what were they trying to steal? Did they even steal anything? And if they were trying to break into the house, why did they kill Brenda over it? Investigators were now taking a look at the crime scene, and there were a couple of things that stood out to them. Now, the back window, this was broken, and according to Sydney, someone had broken into the house and broke the window to get in. But when they took a closer look, they realized that the glass was actually shattered from inside of the house. It didn't look like it was broken from the outside. And they were able to tell based on the direction of the force marks, and it had suggested that this was intentional, almost as if it was being staged. This was not a forced entry. They also took a look at Sydney's clothing because she was covered in blood. She had blood splatter all over herself. And this actually looks like impact splatter. This means that she was near the victim during the time of the attack. This was not blood that got on her clothes from comforting her mom or touching her after the attack. They had also taken a look at Brenda's body, and they had seen extensive blunt force trauma and multiple stab wounds. And the brutality of the murder is just not consistent with a supposed break-in. Why would a stranger stab Brenda 30 times? Yeah, around 30 times, but then leave Sydney untouched. If people are breaking into a house, they do that to break in and steal something and leave. They would not break in and then kill someone, stab them 30 times, then leave a witness untouched and escape. Like, that doesn't make sense, and it's not aligning with Sydney's story. The dean's phone call is also evidence as they're able to corroborate the attack. They heard screaming, there was a loud thud, and they heard Sydney pretending to be her mom. That was all very intentional. And Sydney's story is just not adding up with all of this evidence. It suggests that she was actually the true attacker. And this is what they believe actually happened inside the home. While Brenda was on the phone with the dean, there was a moment where suddenly Sydney comes up behind her and hits her in the head with a cast iron frying pan. She continues to pretty much beat her senseless, and Brenda did survive the initial blows. So Sydney decides to get a steak knife from the kitchen, and she proceeds to stab her 30 times, which is what ultimately kills her. Now, we've covered a lot of true crime on this channel, and at this point, we know that stabbing someone isn't easy. It's an extremely demanding physical thing, and it takes a lot of power, a lot of effort, not just to stab someone once, but 30 times. After she attacks her mom, this is when Sydney goes to the back window of the house and decides to destroy it to make it look like that this was a break-in. She realizes, I just killed my mom. I need to do something. I need to cover my tracks. Someone broke into the house. Yeah. What am I gonna do? Gonna make it look like that. I'm gonna stage the house. I'm gonna move things around. I'm gonna break the window. Unfortunately, that's how she got all those cuts all over her arms. Sydney was arrested later that night and she was charged with murder, felonious assault, and evidence tampering. The same night that Sydney was arrested, she was brought to county jail and Stephen post bond, and then Sydney was released soon after that. But upon release, she didn't just go home with Stephen and live out their life normally in their house while awaiting trial. No, she is immediately sent to an outpatient clinic for psychiatric evaluation, and she was there for around 3 days. Now, during her time there were 2 psychiatrists evaluating her and trying to get a better understanding of her mental state, and they actually ended up diagnosing her with schizophrenia. She was showing a lot of psychotic symptoms, such as disorganized behavior, perceived hallucinations, and it was believed that she was actually experiencing psychosis during the time that she had killed her mom. After this evaluation, she was also involuntarily put into Akron General Hospital for further psychiatric treatment, and she was there for around 1 week. And during this time, she was also further treated with antipsychotic medication, and she was also just being monitored by everyone in case she had another episode. Soon after that, she was discharged, and she didn't go home to live with her dad. She went home to live with her maternal grandmother, Brenda's mom. Now, why didn't she live with her dad? We won't really know. We can only make assumptions. Perhaps he didn't want to be around her, which is super understandable considering what happened. Maybe Sydney herself didn't want to go home. She couldn't face what she had done. You know, walk into your house and you see the exact place where you had killed your mom. So she stayed with her grandmother, but we also don't know if her dad continued living at the house or if he also decided to stay somewhere else because it was just too painful for him to stay at home. Now, Sydney's maternal grandmother ended up becoming her primary caretaker, not her dad. And during this time she stayed with her grandmother, she still continued to receive mental health treatment. She was going to therapy appointments. She was taking her medication while she was awaiting trial. It was reported by Sydney's grandmother that the medication did improve Sydney's symptoms overall. It seemed like she was stabilizing and becoming a little bit more like her old self again. She also had gone through neurological testing, and this was because her dad really wanted her to do this to see if playing sports when she was younger, there were some incidents where she had a concussion and she hit her head, if this was possibly the reason why she had a psychotic break, and if maybe there was some brain damage there that had grown over time that had caused this, but they had found no evidence for this whatsoever. There was no sign of a brain injury, no epilepsy, or any neurological abnormalities. The only diagnosis was schizophrenia. Now, while Sydney was receiving medical care, prosecutors and defense were preparing for trial, but this was 2020. So this was when COVID was rampant. So the trial was actually delayed for 3 years. And during this whole time, Sydney continued her mental health treatment and lived with her grandmother full time. The trial begins on September 7th, 2023. It's 3 years later now, and Sydney is now 22 years old. She enters a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity, and her defense argues a couple of things. They said that her insanity claim is based on her schizophrenia diagnosis. They had said that she lacked awareness during the time of the attack due to her psychotic episode, and there were mental health experts and psychiatrists who backed this up because they were the ones evaluating her and came to this conclusion. They said that she was experiencing symptoms of hallucinations, disorganized thinking, and impaired with perception of reality. So she had no idea what she was doing during this whole time. Sydney's academic decline also supported the onset of her mental illness. She was withdrawing socially, she was lying to her parents, failing school, which was all just very unlike her. She was sleeping excessively. Like, these were all signs of depression. And it seemed like Sydney was the type of person to put way too much pressure on herself. I could see how this possibly could have led to a psychotic break as well. There was also so many environmental pressures for her. She must have had so much stress and anxiety. She wasn't reaching out for help, wasn't sleeping well, loneliness, the social isolation, and there was just all these major life changes that were happening in her life at the time. Failing school and not being used to the fact that you're failing school because you were such a high achieving student, and this like heavy feeling of feeling like you're letting everyone around you down and letting yourself down as well. But even though she was struggling mentally, this wasn't enough to justify what she did. The prosecution argued that she was fully aware of her actions during the time of the attack. They argued that there was evidence of intentional planning and staging of the attack. She had broken the window intentionally, then lied about it by saying someone had broken in. So she was intentionally trying to stage it and get away with what she had done. And she also was posing as her mom when she answered the phone. Like, that is actually a little bit creepy. So all of these acts were very intentional. Like, she knew why she was doing that. She was trying to cover up her own attacks. And even though she had an academic decline, there was still long-term deception. Yeah, she was declining academically, but she was deceiving everyone around her, especially her parents. She intentionally, again, lied for months, deceived people, ignored authorities when asked to leave. And the blood splatter analysis on her clothing, this you can't deny either. It's a pretty strong piece of evidence. She was close to Brenda when the attack had happened, based on how the blood splatter was on her clothing. And of course, we have the witnesses from the two deans who were on the phone with her. They heard the entire attack. The prosecution claimed that Sydney was functioning socially and academically in ways that were inconsistent with psychosis. So the verdict. After 2 weeks of deliberation by the jury, they reached a verdict on September 20th. Guilty of murder, felonious assault, and tampering with evidence. The jurors determined that she did not meet the legal standards of insanity, and she received 15 years to life in prison. She'll be eligible for parole after serving the minimum. So after 15 years of serving, she could still get out of prison and live a somewhat normal life. In December of 2024, her attorneys actually appealed the conviction. At the time of the trial, their team was actually not allowed to respond to the testimonies from prosecution that Sydney was exaggerating her mental health symptoms. And the appeal was successful and the courts overturned her sentence. So the case is open right now for a potential retrial, but it's quite uncertain when that's going to take place at this point. This case is devastating for a lot of reasons. I think about Stephen and the fact that he lost his wife and his daughter in one day. His wife was killed and his daughter was in prison, and I can't imagine how devastating that must be for their family. Sydney is incarcerated at this time, and her grandmother still continues to support her even after the trial. So this actually takes me back to the point where I mentioned Sydney was staying with her maternal grandmother for 3 years before the trial. So there was a lot of comments about this that I had found online. Some people were saying, can you imagine housing your granddaughter after she viciously murdered your own daughter? Like, that is absolutely crazy. And I kind of agree to an extent, but the fact is, we won't ever be able to understand what that situation is like until you've actually experienced it for yourself. Sydney is clearly not well mentally, and maybe her grandmother, who is an older person from an older generation, maybe she felt an obligation to protect her because she was unwell, no matter how horrible it was, no matter what Sydney did. Maybe she knew that at the end of the day, Brenda loved her daughter so much that Brenda would have wanted this for her too. There are a lot of murder cases where parents and grandparents stick by their children no matter what they do. So yes, this is a little weird, but it's not actually as abnormal as you would think it is. And again, Sydney was 18 years old at the time, so no one in her family was actually legally required to look after her. So clearly her grandmother had her own reasons and wanted to take care of Sydney. And we may not understand them, but how could we? I don't know about you, but it's almost impossible to put myself in their shoes given how extreme the situation is. Now, this case sparks an important conversation around mental illness and accountability. Everyone struggles with mental health issues at some point in their life, and some, of course, more than others. And I do sympathize with this case to some extent, but it does not justify what Sydney did. At a certain point, we have to take accountability for ourselves and ask for help when we need it. I know it's not always easy to do so. It's probably one of the most difficult things. You feel so vulnerable, you feel guilt, you feel shame, you feel depressed, but there are people out there who care about you and want to support you and help you get better. So if you are one of those people who are struggling with anything mentally, please reach out because there are people who care about you. Thank you guys so much for watching today's video. I know there were some parts of this case that were pretty difficult and heavy to listen to, so please make sure you guys are checking in with yourselves and with those around you, but I appreciate you guys listening in. If you found this video informative, don't forget to like, subscribe, and just comment any thoughts that you have down below. I would love to read what you guys think about this one. I'll see you in the next video.